there's a really cool study done that find you can predict geographic areas of more incel activity, more incel rhetoric, based on 3 variables. So number 1, income inequality, where there's a large gap between high status men and low status men. Number 2, low gender pay gaps, where women are not needing to depend on men in the same way, where women kind of are free to have higher standards. You see a lot more incel rhetoric there, where there are fewer men that women desire. And then the final variable is just male-biased sex ratios. So when there's fewer single women to go around in the first place. So even information in the local mating ecology, as kind of crude as that, can predict the rise of or the intensity of incel rhetoric. Because it is quite like that maybe perhaps in the modern mating market, women don't need to settle in ways that they might have in previous generations. Even in the show, it kind of hinted at it that his father, it went into the storyline of how he met his wife, the kid's mother, and it was just at school, and they got together kind of straightforward, and it was a clear path to how to form a romantic relationship. I think the modern mating market for young people is very atomized. The kind of the social institutions of how you might meet someone are kind of vanishing, and it's kind of being funneled towards just online. Which perhaps isn't doing anyone any favors. Both sexes seem to not like the online dating. But yeah, institutions like even meeting your partner at work is kind of frowned upon now. It's not the done thing. So all of this is kind of creating a kind of an atomization where young men and young women are more responsible for their own dating life, which is pretty evolutionarily novel. I mean, you had a lot of kin networks or even friends setting you up on dates in the past. That's kind of novel. Now you're responsible for it yourself, and it could lead to a lot of disgruntlement from both men and women in how to do that. So women will have the problem of there are fewer desirable men around because they're outpacing them in terms of education and employment. And men might feel resentment at, well, in past generations, it would have been a lot easier for us to find someone to settle down with us, but now they don't want to. So it's causing resentment for both groups.
There's so much to dig into there. And I want to stick just on the topic of status for a little bit. Something that gets reiterated a few times in the show is this Pareto's principle idea of 80% of women being attracted to 20% of men. And one of the actors, he's the cop's son. He goes on to say something that almost sounds scripted, like he's just reciting from an Andrew Tate video he's seen online or whatever. That's sort of what was implied, I think. He goes on and he says, women, you must trick them because you'll never get them in a normal way, following that Pareto's principle quote. How much truth is there to that 80-20 rule?
Well, I think there is some truth to that there is what we call attraction inequality in the mating market. So more men are attracted to more women than women are attracted to men, all things being equal. Now, something as crude and as hard and fast like an 80-20 rule is a little bit kind of a blunt analysis. But like you say, that Pareto distribution applies to almost anything. The kind of the very narrow top end of the success spectrum gets a lot of the success. And it perhaps in the past, there were these social institutions. So, for example, monogamy is one. We have a deep ancestral history of polygyny, where one high-status man would have multiple wives.
83% of history, right?
83% of human societies had preferential polygyny. Now, that doesn't mean that there was a lot of polygyny in those societies, but it just meant that that most high-status man would have multiple wives. Most men in those societies would still only have one wife, but the fact that some men at the very top do have more than one does mean there are others kind of left out. Now, there's a really good paper by Joseph Henrich called The Puzzle of Monogamous Marriage, and it shows about how culturally cultures that began to practice monogamy flourished in a way that those that didn't kind of went by the wayside, because basically they solved the problem of a more egalitarian distribution of mates. They basically removed the problematic incels from causing a lot of trouble, because if you have a growing number of young men who are without a marriage partner, they cause a lot of trouble in those societies. And throughout history, cultures have invented cultural institutions to try and deal with this excess population of single young men. In evolutionary psychology, we call it the young male syndrome. When young mateless men are around the place, they elevate their risk-taking and status striving very high, because if you're on track to get a evolutionary zero, you kind of will take a lot of risks in trying to change that. So monogamy kind of buffers against that. So it evolved as a cultural norm, and cultures were more peaceful. Now the pressures for women to settle down with one man are kind of gone away to some extent. I was saying that cultures throughout history have invented institutions to deal with these troublesome incels. So they would have made Vikings out of them, for example. They would have sent them on raids to get away from their own society. They would have sent them to the monastery, which was a somewhat high status position, which meant it was okay that you didn't have a marriage partner or a mate. Lots of different cultural institutions that recognized this problem and tried to deal with it. Modern men may have their own institution in the form of the internet. That may be occupying otherwise really destabilizing young men. They may be just spending their time playing status games on the internet or in video games or with pornography. Kind of it's pacifying them or distracting them from going out into the real world and competing aggressively for mates that way.
But it doesn't seem to be satisfying them compared to the profundity of becoming a monk.
Mm-hmm.
So where does it go from here?
Yeah, that's the one element that there's no real status afforded to. Yes, you may get your sexual needs satisfied somewhat by pornography. That may be just enough to keep you satisfied there. You get your kind of dopamine satisfied by the status games on the internet, but there is no real world status, and particularly no status that comes from being sexually selected by a member of the opposite sex. That really elevates your status. So it is kind of dystopian, and you might see a world in future where a lot of men have the kind of the virtual artificial intimacy of virtual reality, sex robots in the future perhaps, but that's the one kind of element that it won't come with. It won't come with any status. Perhaps I'm wrong. Maybe in a dystopian future, the high status man will be the guy who can afford the most sophisticated sex robot, but I think there will still be special status to being sexually selected by the member of the opposite sex.
I think so too, and people always bring this up. AI girlfriends, they're going to change the culture, everything's going to be completely different, but there is that lack of real life selection, and it's something that gets put into thought experiments all the time, and it's a very philosophical question of, would you rather take a reality where